morning, good afternoon, and evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us from wherever you are. Today's February 27th, 2025. Welcome to our sixth webinar in the series, focused on history of people, forest, and forestry. We're now halfway through the series, and so hope you all are enjoying it so far. As ever, this series is co-hosted by the Forest School at the Yale School of the Environment and also the Forest History Society. My name is Gary Dunning. I'm the Executive Director of the Forest School and the Forest Dialogue, both based here at the Yale School of the Environment in New Haven, Connecticut in the US. And I am one of your hosts for the series, and I'll be introducing today's webinar. Few more quick introductions of our co-hosts. Professor Mark Ashton. Mark is the Morris K. Jessup Professor of Silviculture and Forest Ecology and the Director of the Yale Forests. And Tanya Munz. Tanya is the President and CEO of the Forest History Society based in Durham, North Carolina in the US. Tanya and I are trading off facilitation duties for the series. And as you all know, this YFF webinar series explores histories of people, forests, and forestry. Again, we are now halfway through the series, and as you can see on this slide, we still have a fantastic slate of speakers coming up, covering some really important themes over the next 2 months. Again, as you know, the series convenes on Thursdays from 12 to 1 Eastern US time through the end of April. The webinar presentations run roughly 30 minutes or so, and audience Q&A follows immediately. Please remember to submit your questions using Zoom's Q&A function. Each session in the series will be recorded and available on the Yale Forest Forum's website shortly after the session. And of course, if you have any questions related to the series, just email us at yff@yale.edu. Now, I'm very happy to introduce today's speaker, Anabel Ford. Anabel is the director of the MesoAmerican Research Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Anabel has distinguished herself as a Mesoamerican archaeologist focused on settlement and environmental issues of the lowland Maya of Guatemala and Belize. Her landmark investigations challenge the perceptions of rural and urban divides, demonstrating that preferred locations for Maya settlements equally occupied well-drained uplands near or far from civic centers. Living in the Maya forest and relying on the resources that were native to that place, Anabel began to gain an appreciation for the local knowledge of and economic value inherent in what first looked like a jungle, but really was a relic of forest gardens. Her current focus on El Pilar, a new tour destination in the Maya world, integrates her growing academic knowledge of the ancient occupations and her investment in the citizen scientists living in the region today. Since 1994, Anabel has spearheaded a unique development that focuses on one cultural and natural resource of Belize and Guatemala. The development at El Pilar is an inclusive management model with government protection, local leadership, and community participation, along with academic research input. Anabel brings her extensive field experience and broadly inquisitive mind to address what has popularly been known as the mysterious Maya. Anabel's talk today is titled The Ancient Art of the Maya Forest Garden, a mythologized past and uncertain future. All right, with that awkward ending there, Anabel, I'm going to hand it over to you. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of you have an impression of the Maya. and uh, preconceived ideas of the tropics, or perhaps even direct experience. So I'm going to be presenting some of my experience that really now is covering many, many decades, astonishingly. When I talk to my students about what I'm working on, it's decades before they were born now. So we're looking at a broad history here when I talk about the Maya forest. Um, the Maya forest is tropical forest, and we've been hearing something about the tropics. And it's occurred to me when I look at these hotspots, and these are just generally picked up just to give an example of this plant-human relationship, because it seems that where humans are, the plant world is simplified. And if you think of Africa, there are, people have been there, humans have been there for um, millennia, I mean, millions of years, several millions of years, where Southeast Asia will say, 300,000. But the New World is something that is really only in the last less than 20,000 years. And I think there is a relationship between how humans interact with and interact with their plants. And in fact, there still can be biodiversity, but there can also be a favoring of plants that create what I call this forest garden. When we think of the origins of the New World, um, we have to think of people who came into this landscape well before 12,000 years ago, and they came with the basic knowledges of and skills that came with stone and fire. So these would be their management tools. And data show that they probably expanded from the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego in approximately 2,000 years. So whatever point they were entering, you can imagine that. And while my slide shows people just going south, obviously people were coming north as well. And during this period of adaptation, they were going from something very cold, the Ice Age, into the Holocene, which is a period that is much warmer. And so these people not only are adapting to the landscape with the skills of stone and fire, but they're also adapting to um, changing conditions on that landscape. We've heard a bit about the Amazon, and the Amazon and the Maya forest are the tropical forests of the New World. Now, the Amazon is, 20 times the size of the Maya forest, but even so, it only has the Maya forest with 50% of its landscape as fertile soil or moderate to fertile soil, compares very curiously. It's only 1/10 the size of the landscape of fertile soil is 1/10 the size of the Amazon. Clear the attraction of people who are looking to establish themselves and obviously become more settled on the landscape would be concerned with fertile landscape. The area where I'm working is called the Maya Forest, and you can see here where El Pilar is. It's only 50 kilometers from Tikal, one of the major centers of the Maya area, and really something to really imagine is. I mean, only 50 kilometers away, and there's many sites, many centers in between. This is a very uh, complex landscape. Today, it's considered, as we said, one of those hot spots. It's got the many different strategies for conservation and keeping people out, which is something that may actually be a demise of the forest, because here we can see the common trees of the 20 dominant trees of the Maya forest that we record at every place where we map when in our work at El Pilar. All of these are useful, and all of them have values that we can think of today, but probably in the past as well. And in fact, are oligarchic. Something be about between 50 and 70% of the well-drained uplands will have these trees, but only one is a wind-pollinated uh, uh, plant, which, of course, when we go to look at uh, uh, pollen assays, these paleoclimate indicators, we have to really imagine what are the data we're looking at, and how this might be impacted by both the kinds of things that would be climate changes as well as humans on the landscape. And if you notice in this one, I'm not sure if the a pointer can work, but between 10 and 8,000, we see a big change from cold, arid in this area to warm, wet, something more akin to what we think of today. And this proxy, which is Brossima malacastrum or Ramon, the one that is a wind-pollinated tree, probably 2% of the trees of plants, all plants in the Maya forest are actually wind pollinated. So you really have to consider what kind of data we're getting here. And the part where people are interpreting the demise of the Maya is the change in the proxy. Maybe a good proxy for the climate signature 8,000 years ago, but this is a human signature. And so this disturbance is considered forest versus disturbance. And I want to talk a little bit more throughout this talk of what that disturbance means, because they're posing it as the demise of the forest when really it's the activity on the landscape, clearly a human indication and a change. But if you're familiar, for example, with Robin Chasson's work, there's a greater understanding of the second growth, and that plant cover and land use can really still be not claimed as no forest. So I want to focus on this last period, the 4,000 years, which is really the period of land use and that the archaeological work can face. The narrative of the demise of the forest is really predicated on this image that I've recreated here. It was first published in a document in 1987 and has been reprinted in many different archaeological and sort of general paleoecological studies looking at the Maya area. And it focuses on that idea of forests. It calls forests in savanna, and I would say savanna means grasslands. And it's made up an idea of high and low population density, implying that the Maya completely vanished at the when this collapse happened. When really it's much more complicated. In fact, if you look at the detail, this climate chaos period, these are data from the Cariaco, and it reflects what's happening in the Maya area as well. And you can see that when the drop in the Brossima malacastrum happens during this period of climate chaos. This is also a period when the Maya start settling on the landscape, and that we start recognizing settlement more permanent. They're probably mobile horticulturalists, but they're still establishing themselves on the landscape. By 3,000 years, we're already finding small centers. El Pilar has some building at this time period. But interestingly, by 2,000 years ago, when the classic period begins, it's when we see a more stable rainfall. And that's really, you can see that the relationship of this disturbance, which is really forbs that are annuals and perennials that are wind pollinated, that really what we're seeing is a change of land use on the landscape, not something that's a destruction of the forest. You can't live by Ramon alone. So that's going to be part of our story here. Then I wanted to look at the idea of savanna. I had actually believed that there was, a dominance of grasslands, but grasslands or grasses represent always less than about 20% of the pollen rain, especially during the period of the classic. So I do not think that this narrative that portrays the rise, destruction of the forest, and the expansion of grasslands has any merit. When we look at the Maya forest today, Scott Fedek has done a mammoth job of going through all of the literature of what are plants that are native to the Maya forest, that are part of the food sources. And these are often called famine foods, but you couldn't have foods that present themselves in the famine if you didn't already use them. So it's really important to imagine these as really part of the repertoire of the food that people eat, that also have a bearing on what we are calling the Maya forest cropscape. And here I have a list of a summary list of the different plants that are recognized today and in the past. These are the materials that are recovered from the Maya archaeological sites, and even in the middens we find 58% are shrubs and trees, and they represent 74 species. So we're not talking about something that doesn't have longevity. It's a very important concept to think of, that these plants, and that more than 57% are fruits, which are really have to be on mature perennial trees. Another factor impacting the Maya forest, and really has lots of uh, ink spilled on this idea of drought and the Maya. I just find, I mean, the drought, clearly farmers need to have rainfall, and this is a rainfall system that the Maya forest was developed upon. But it's not so simple. When you look at annual rainfall, it really obscures all the kinds of variations, not just the seasonal variations, but the kind of variations that farmers actually attend to, signals of what the birds are doing, what the insects are doing, how the cicadas are present or not. These are all factors, the few that I can even remember and understand. Uh, we have to bear in mind that rain is distributed annually very differently. That we always have said, or you hear it has two seasons, the rain and the dry period, but actually the wet period has two distinct periods. So one is directed by the ITCZ, that is bringing the hurricane or the summer monsoonal rains and hurricanes to the Yucatan Peninsula. And then there's the December, after November, December, January, February, the what's coming from where Yale is, the cold weather that's coming based on the North Atlantic oscillations. So really, there are two periods of rainfall, and so if you're going to have one drought, or a year with one drought, or many years with one drought, you have to be affecting two systems. And that is very, I don't think that even today people have found teleconnections between these two systems operating in the Atlantic Ocean. So droughts, are something really to look at in terms of scale. So there's a drought annually between like March and June, and those are always something that the landscape is impacted, and the Maya would be concerned about. And remember, they even the kinds of things they're going to worry about are, water conservation, how much is on there, and deluge as well as drought can be difficult. And finally, the really most important thing is how it's delivered. Let's say you have 2,000 millimeters of rain, that's the average, and it's delivered all in, let's just say, October, when you're actually you're reaping your maize and whatever else you're getting. That would destroy your crops. So you can't look specifically at the number per year to understand how it's being used. Equally, if we don't have rain in June and July, the crops will not grow. So you might have uh, a good year, but if they aren't delivered at the right time, you will not have a good yield. So it's very nuanced, and it's very much something that farmers are very, uh, they're aware of in that environment. And in fact, they are building what I call a climate resilient system, these principles of forest gardens, which I'm outlining here, but almost any tropical landscape would have had this kind of things. I think of Conklin's work in the Philippines, where he actually sets to the stage of what we understand as Swidden, The people are working this landscape in an asynchronous manner. They're building perennials. They're developing openings for their fields, for their crops. All the time, they're concerned about fertility. They have plants that are moderating erosion. Of course, just having cover of any kind will lower temperature. Conserving water, very important to have shade for conserving water. And of course, biodiversity is just a natural part of building a system with coordinating with the natural systems, but of course, simplifying it to have the plants that you really want to have. And another thing is fire risk. There's a lot of concern about the use of fire in Sweden, but actually it's something very, very um, strategically and carefully managed. So how has the developed world looked at the Maya forest? In fact, they take a view that is just astonishing. Here is a 1982 map created with the USDA standard classification of land capacity. And this is Tikal right in the middle, one of the biggest Maya centers, considered one of the major cities in the area. These people who were looking at the soil describe this as not cultivable. Didn't they see the irony of saying not cultivable and looking at a major Maya city that must have been an agrarian city? It just seems laughable. But cultivable, they were talking about arable, which is plowable. And this area is not plowable. So they were looking ahead of how they might use it, not looking at really the reality of what might be usable. They said it was useful only for forestry. So maybe agroforestry? Just a thought. In fact, here's an example. This is a road cut going up to El Pilar in like 1980, 81, when they're building a new road. And you can see limestone, which absorbs water, is right beneath the fertile, these are ricinas or mollisols that are building right on the top of a very young, you know, Cretaceous Eocene limestones, as opposed to the no virtually what no bedrock in the Amazon. Really, this has many, many minerals that would be really important for creating a cultivable landscape, but it's not arable. Clearly not arable. It's rocky and shallow. The perception is only deep soils, but in fact, cultivable and arable are two different things. I remember reading The Future of Life by E.O. Wilson, and he never used the word arable. He used cultivable. No, he used arable, not cultivable, and never thought about things not being useful for the plow. So the plow isn't the only way to use the land. That's a very important fact. So the Maya forest garden, it's the cropscape that every part of it is useful to the Maya. They were managing not just the crops, and I'm reminded of the talk last time where we're looking at the Swidden system of Southeast Asia and the perception that only the crops are where people are using it. It's the whole system. You cannot live in this forest without managing the whole system. And it's for the animals, the habitat, the perennial trees for all kinds of uses. And it's really based on the people, and especially agroforestry, who have looked at the traditional ecological knowledge of this landscape. And it's not something that is just in the past history, or it's ethnohistorically as well, because the Spanish conquest had problems. I mean, Cortez crossed the whole Petén of Guatemala and claimed it was, an impenetrable jungle, but he hardly ever spent the night without being in a roofed place. Never talks about starving. He's using the resources across that landscape that, were the occupants were producing. Here's an example of the kinds of problems that the Maya faced. Not that in fact, this map here is a contemporary map, but the Spanish wanted to legislate that there should not be sown milpas nor groves if they were there, they should be burned. So you can imagine that there's a lot of force against the strategies that were actually flexible and importantly adaptable. And here is an example of a home infield. You can see very much the use of sun and shade. Um, and really, when we look at these infields and we think of them as these forested places, they're home gardens, the kinds of things that are in maize-dominated outfields is actually the same kinds of plants that we find in the infields, which look like forests, where the maize field looks like a maize field. In fact, in those maize fields are a lot of plants that are growing back and will be trees later on. So it's really a dynamic where it's field to forest to field with a short-term annuals that open up and allow the management of the fast-growing perennials and into the mature canopy to resume that cycle. In fact, it's really important to imagine that's really only 1/5 of the landscape that might be in the annuals, where the rest of the period is going into these managed succession and regeneration. It starts, if we have a starting point at all, with fire. I always thought of these people that were specialists among the community as fire tenders, but they're called Yum-Ik, which is really Lord of the Wind. And if you remember just a month ago here in California, it was the wind that really caused the fires. So it's really managing the wind that is critical in opening up these spaces for the annual crops. And it's not something that's done lightly. They create these things they just call traces or rays, very slight, really hardly even more than a meter. And they do black backfires, and very much you can see that it's green all around. There's no wildfire. They do not start a fire when it's too hot and too windy, and they rarely even consider fire after April 15th, which is a time period where it really starts getting dry. Here's an example of a recently burned field. You can see there's trees there and these small sticks sticking up. These I always thought were to impale archaeologists doing survey, but in fact they resprout, hastening the regeneration of this. In other words, it's not simply slash and burn, it's select and grow. Again, planting with the stony outfield is no place for a plow, but it's not very long that these areas look green and full of different crops, up to 30, maybe even 50 crops selected from some 100 that are available. Also, of course, allowing weeds that grow that would attract nematodes so that their corns would be more fruitful. Really a very nuanced way that these landscapes are managed. And even when they look like they're beyond and ready to, as people call it, abandon, say, too many weeds, these weeds that are volunteering are actually edible. The maize is turned down to be harvested a little later, and beans are growing up the stalks. This is getting ready for the second time, the cool rainy period, so just after the warm rainy period. So they have a possibility of having 2 harvests in a year. When an area is what people call abandoned, it's not abandoned. It is managed in a way. The regeneration is very much a building perennials. In this case, you can see very clearly that it's a modern field and it has plantain and other kinds of fast-growing perennials that are protecting the long-term perennials, which in this case, this man really, Zacharias Kischan, really favored having wood for lumber. I want to really emphasize I really object both the use of arable for cultivable and the use of fallow. Fallow technically is an unseeded plowed field, and these are not fallow, and the kind of energy and effort that goes into these areas is really very much more than you would imagine an unseeded plowed field. It's not abandoned. It's very much an active area. It might not seem that way to some people, but it is a very important area. And in the end, things can start looking, or not in the end, as they mature, Here's a mature orchard of many different trees. They're all perennial. You can see they're dominating and closing the canopy, but we're still seeing these fast-growing perennials, relics of the plantains here, and also forbs that would be contributing to the assay of the pollen rain. Clearly not, this is a cover edible forest, food forest, but there are a lot of other kinds of plants growing in it. And of course, these people that I get to know all say that if they have, equivalent of 50 acres, they have probably half of it in what they call a reserve. Now, this isn't a reserve like don't touch it. It's a reserve where they're using it for their family needs. And Zacharias here, who sadly Chaco, he died not too long ago. He said this tree that we're standing in front of would be his retirement. How does this play out on a landscape? In my early work, I was doing broad survey in an area that I consider about 1,300 square kilometers, and through a predictive model, we were able to see where settlement was and wasn't, and looked at how land use could be perceived in that area. And I used a model of based on maize yield, and we can see if we used maize in the area with a low production of maize, even that in low production would be about 850 kilograms per hectare. That half the area would still be in forest, and the regeneration would be another, almost 40%, so that really the land cover that would be there would be, in the order of about 1/5 of the land would be open. If the same zone had higher yield, we can even see that there's more forest. And of course, if the highest yield is the Lacandon, 2,800 kilograms per hectare. And if we had 182,000 people in the area where I've done my fieldwork, the big El Pilar area, you could see that, it's a astonishing 80% would still be in forest, and there still would be the regeneration. So it's a much more complicated thing, and you can imagine you can intensify just with skill, labor, and knowledge. So going back to this environmental and cultural change interpretation from the pollen and rainfall data, you can see again that the Ramon rises with the rise of the precipitation, and it really changes with that climate chaos. And the period with that we are looking at, the development of centers in the classic period Maya, really is the changes that we see, what they call disturbance, which is really the annual and perennial forbs, and the grasses never were an important part of the landscape in this Maya forest prehistory. So really, it's I look at this model, I look at how the relationship of the quote disturbance, which are the forbs, with the Ramon in this case, which is only one of the 20 dominant plants of the Maya forest. And I think this is a vital sign of a good milpa land use, a good Swidden system. Don't seem to get it to go forward. Let's see. So here is the forest canopy at El Pilar, and can't see very much, but with the LiDAR, which we have used, we've been able to survey the entire binational area of Belize and Guatemala, which is really an amazing thing that I was able to help promote to get a binational protected area around El Pilar. We found 9 civic centers, but also 2,339 structures or house mounds. This area has 9 major soil classes. We're still working on that. I've estimated around 4,000 people That's 204 people per square kilometer. It's been um, uh, summarized that the Ming density, China dynasty was around 65 people per square kilometer, and that's in 1500. And pre-industrial, pre-modern Japan is about I don't know, 120 people. So looking at 204 people is a very high density. Even that, the Maya archaeologists want to see things like 500 or 1,000 people per square kilometer, which is, a little hard to really fathom that you could support those high numbers. So population and land use are related, and we really have to look at them in a more balanced way. So I've worked with my students on this using the LiDAR. We eliminated all architecture and any land that was greater than 15 degrees, so considering too steep. And we're able to come up with this model that you can see animated here, where we have 4 years of milpa field, and then we have the regeneration and the mature canopy. And we also counted the infield. So in looking at the broader cycling, and this is as hectares, just modeled as hectares, we came up with the fact that we would have almost 2.6 square kilometers available for land use in the milpa cycle, and given my population estimates, that would come up with we'd need 2.4. So we meet that. Yet even with the infields, we get 3.45 square kilometers using the land use of the infield. So clearly, and this is looking at, I think, the 1,200, what does it say? Yeah, 1,144 kilograms per hectare. So you can imagine that could also be intensified to support greater numbers. But in this case, we can see how the landscape would be used and modeled and constantly in this dynamic, by clearing the fields, you're reducing the fuel load asynchronously across this landscape. It's really quite magnificent to think that they would not be able to get wildfires, they would have biodiversity, they would be structuring this to manage all the different things they need, the household needs. But one of the things that people haven't considered is how people constructed their houses. These platforms that we have, we call them house mounds, are considered the foundations of perishable structures. And all archaeologists who have worked in the Maya area consider these evidence of the Maya houses, and they are used for creating the population densities. But just like the Sustainable Development Goals want good nutrition and good shelter, we have to start thinking about how the Maya use this landscape also to support the shelter. If all of these areas, all of the houses were roofed, we would need somewhere around every year, if they lasted, the estimate is they last 40 to 60 years, so I would say 40 years, we would need about 600 posts, over 1,000 beams and 1,000 rafters, and a huge number of thatching palms, which really starts baffling one when I'm talking to my colleagues, the master forest gardeners. And this is where I'm at now, wanting to populate my regenerating mature and perennial areas to see how we would get posts, beams, rafters, and the leaves to support the houses that we have. Now, of course, not all of them may be occupied, but even if you look at 80% of this number, it's still a pretty significant number. And I think the landscape will support the trees. I'm a little concerned about getting enough of the palms. It's interesting that all the trees that they use, the posts require heartwood. They call it chulul. So only about 17 of the 50 trees that I've been able to identify are good for posts. Beams and rafters, of course, are smaller, but they have to be flexible. And trees like mahogany are completely inappropriate for any kind of, they don't have um, heartwood, so they can't be used as a post, and they aren't flexible. They're brittle, so they would never be used for construction, so used for furnishings or other kinds of things like that. But very important, the kinds of things, and all of them resprout. So I'm imagining, as you're managing this landscape, that when you cut a tree, you're cutting it with the future in mind, because you will still need to repair your houses. Um, uh, it's a what is a time-space challenge to figure out this. It's not like with the yields of maize, where you can just say, okay, maize yield, we can move that around. This is a much more complicated, and looking for help if there's anyone interested in helping. So what is the implications today? Well, climate change in Belize is noticeable. I thought I was just being um, not maladapted to, but the temperature is rising, and it probably has risen. Uh, Nighttime temperature has risen more than 1 degree centigrade, and we're getting a lot more diversity and deluge and drought in the Maya area as well. So these are things that really do need the flexibility and adaptability that the Maya milpa forest garden cycle brought. And these heroes that I've been working with, they're all of them are quite ready. When I speak with them, they are excited to imagine and even laugh at me at some of the questions I might have. They think are so obvious. But these people are leaving us. Beatriz Waite, a really wonderful healer, has died. Guadalupe Landero, really amazing with flowers, probably very good with bees. Uh, Leonardo Abando, he liked bees. He cared for bees as well as cattle, which is amazing. And he was very experimental. He had lots of Ramon, which is really good for cattle. Al Cariocano, a leader and a very important person, not part of my team. Heriberto Cocom was a teacher and had a wonderful medicine garden. And of course, my most favorite, Chaco Kishchan, he's died. It's really, these are heroes and these are citizen scientists. We really need to honor and bring into the world of solutions. These people are not being asked. They really are part of this landscape and really need to be included. And I've done a little bit on my part. I asked our chancellor to, if there was any way we could award Narciso Torres, who's worked with me for over 40 years. And he said, we don't give honorary degrees, but the Chancellor's Medal is one of the most prestigious things that UC can offer. And based on all the plant uses that I've learned from Narciso, the Chancellor gave him the Chancellor's Medal. That was 2 years ago. And because of that, the government of Belize thought this was not something that shouldn't be not noticed in Belize. So the Governor General, who is the King's representative in the Commonwealth, presented a prestigious meritorious citizen for environment to Narciso. So there are little ways we can do. We need more ways to bring these people into the public view, because really the plentiful Maya forest garden landscape, this is really a cropscape, was much more complicated and much more diverse than people have imagined. And certainly the kinds of imagination we see in the public view is a devastated forest. But if they ate from that forest and they provided shelter from that forest, it had to be much more a part of life. And of course, the Maya call it otoshkash, which is the forest is my home. Doesn't mean just that they're at home in the forest, but the forest actually is part of their house. I question how we're honoring it. This image is by an artist who lives in Yucatan now, and I really appreciated their view. This is Sail. I would like him to do something for El Pilar like this, because what I see that the celebration of ancient Maya in terms of how tourism has impacted the Maya area is just completely removed the forest from the landscape and really invented the architecture. here is, we can see what Catherwood, with his camera obscura, drew of the Castillo at Chichen and what it is today. Now, I don't know about what you think, but gravity is not just a good idea, it's the law. How could possibly uh, the top of the Chichen Castillo look so different to 200 years later? It just doesn't seem possible. But this is how people are creating the image of the Maya. And of course, no forest is there, not even a question of whether they lived in the forest. When they are clearing, as archaeologists are wont to do, and the tourism industry wants to see, they're exposing these monuments. You can see in 1972 what I saw on the right, and in 2012 what I saw on the left. And this is a product of really exposing these ancient monuments to the sun in the nighttime moisture, and the daytime brings out these salts to the edges of the limestone, and these biofilms that form actually draw up the salt and drop acid and turn these stones into dust. So really making ruins of monuments rather than monuments of the ruins, which is my hope. And I'm promoting this concept of archaeology under the canopy, where it would be, we'd learn with the forest gardeners, who could actually be the people who help us manage this landscape and create windows into the ancient monuments that are more, I don't know if it's worth saying authentic, but giving an appreciation of the forest and making a question of discovery and actually asking how that forest was part of the Maya landscape. And it's really not impossible. Here's the house where I'm based in Cayo when I acquired it in 2005, and only 2 years later, with the help of the forest gardeners, what it looked like and what it looks today. Now, nobody around me has these things, but when I have to get repairs to the phone or internet or whatever, they ask what color is the house. I say, look for the trees. And I really have to thank the collaborators that work for it. And here's sort of the dream, is making El Pilar a living museum to consider how the Maya landscape could be in the future. And we are also promoting a celebration of forest gardeners with this, and encourage you to check it out and maybe give some support. And thank you. I think I took too long.
Annabella, thank you so much. Appreciate that presentation. Lots of material you covered, but really interesting, and certainly really aligns well with previous presentations that we've had. So really understanding the Maya and how the Milpa system help facilitate their communities. We have only a little bit of time, but let's see if we can get how many questions we can get through. So I'm just going to jump right in if that's okay. Shira asks, what types of policies would you recommend to build climate resilience of agroforestry systems, given what you found in your research?
Wow. In Belize and Guatemala, they have the natural resource component and the agricultural component. You could say agricultural department, or I think they're departments or institutes, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Natural Resources, and they are not in sync. So it would be really important to have, like in Belize, the object of the agricultural system is to clear the land. And as a consequence, clearing with D6s and anchor chains is just as good as clearing with a machete. So the chances of actually understanding the landscape or building something along, sentinel trees or incredible animals is not in sync with the natural resource component, which actually wants to have trees identified. So really, in terms of policy, we need to get an agroforestry policy. I guess that would be something really important. And recognizing the agroforesters there.
Okay, great. John asks, did growing crops without plowing occur in natural forest canopy gaps, or were trees felled to allow sunlight for growing crops?
Okay, that's a continuum because, of course, in the time period when were dominated by, let's just talk about the 8,000 to 4,000 when people were mobile agriculturalists. They were probably taking advantage of gaps. But as things became more difficult, as I say, after 4,000 years ago, people had to settle and they were probably using systems that were clear. I've always been interested in the concept of gaps, though. I've looked at different books that present a map, and I wonder that if gaps are about 1/5 of the landscape, it would be interesting to see if the relationship between clearing and gaps are comparable.
That's great. Um, let's see, where are we? Casey asks, how would these agroforesters manage competition with animals over the crop?
Well, they recognize they don't see humans as different than everything else. All of the animals and trees are all part of their, I don't know, their community. And feeding the animals is as important as feeding themselves. And if you hear like the cha-chak is a traditional, not very often used now, where they would have a little prayer system and a ceremony before they did the planting. And they recognized I'm leaving the little outside things for the deer. I hope that someone makes sure that that tree, the cedar tree, doesn't fall. And lots of different relationships to the animals and plants. And I don't think, I mean, clearly they would rather have fewer plants. And of course, there is the leaving of weeds that are attracting animals. So I think that there's a much more symbiotic relationship, something that's hard for us to understand.
Right. You were talking about the house mounds and the likely construction, the three different I think three different types of trees or timber need for constructing a house. Um, you mentioned mahogany and mahogany couldn't be used for two. Where was it used for the beams? I'm just curious.
No, I, I,
So
I
mahogany wasn't
insist
used.
that mahogany it doesn't have heartwood, and if you used it as a beam, it would be brittle. So the kinds of things that racking that happens in a house, they would not service for that. They could not be used. They're a dominant tree, so they
Mm.
clearly were either a weed, which I mean, Laura Snooks says that they grow very well. So I mean, we have to think of why are they there. But I think like many items like the Corozo palm, you can't cut it or burn it. It'll always come back. So if mahogany was that way, I'm sure that they need many kinds of furnishings in houses. You need to have a sit, you need to have tables, you need to have places to put things. They had many things by the late classic, many different things that we know of, the pottery and so forth. So I'm assuming that it was very good for furnishings, though, it could be that this is a relic. I mean, they aren't good for the houses, but it could be that the use of lumber and the preclusion of that for Maya use could have affected how contemporary Maya view mahogany.
Right. Do you know what trees were likely used in the construction?
Yeah, I have a list now. There are 51 trees that I have that I've confirmed. All of them, I have 139 trees that I've identified at El Pilar, and they're all there. And these also confirm with some other few people that have looked at Maya building in Yucatan as well. So the kinds of conditions they have to have heartwood, they have to be, the
Mm.
heartwood for putting it. If you put a tree, they told me the way I found out about the mahogany, I said, "Oh, my mahogany," because I'm growing a mahogany at my house. Oh, it's about the size of a post, and they thought I was telling a joke. I
Mm.
mean, that you would never use that as a post. If you put it in the ground as a post, it would just completely deteriorate.
Okay.
So, you have to bear that in mind.
No, obviously, that knowledge is really important if you're building houses. Um, Another question, how are these farming, agroforestry, and burning techniques that you discussed taught? Um,
You
Is it
know,
typically
so
carried down through generation to generation?
I can tell you it's being lost. There are two ways in the 50 years that I've been working down there. Absolutely, people were walking in the footsteps of their elders. So they were learning about how to manage fire. And like I said, that just like, my relatives in Ireland, as a community of people, there would be better people who were butchers. There were better people who were fire tenders, the Eek. And so they would learn also from that. Uh, and people would become more specialists in managing fire. You can only imagine fire is a dangerous thing. Uh, but now it is just, I mean, pega fuego. They do not have, and I guess I would also say there were active, what do you call it, extension office, the agriculture extension office. The extension office now, I talked to some people there. Oh, anyone can come in and we'll talk to them. Well, that's not doesn't sound very extended, but people were out in the field talking with people, knowing them, and that isn't happening now. So in like 2020, unfortunately, I was unable for a global reason not to get down to the field, but somebody started a fire. It was in May, clearly not the right time, and it burned about 85% of the El Pilar area in Belize. Didn't get so far into Guatemala because they don't have as much impact of humans. But that I have is just astonishing because you can see that people aren't paying attention to wind and heat.
Here's a question about bees.
Mhm.
Um, the common honeybee is an introduction from Eurasia. Were some native bees domesticated in?
Well, there's a whole debate. I mean, they were bees, and people had beehives, beautiful, beautiful beehives. They're scaffoldings in uh, wood with the hollowed out wood bits, beautiful things, sometimes carved. Beekeeping was extraordinarily important at the time of contact, and I really think if I could get some support and collaboration with people who know more about bees, that we could use that as really the indicator of forest gardening, because bees need both water and um, and pollen all the time. They need to have it cool. They can't have, hot and no water. But so bees, the honeybee, when it was introduced, it really practically eliminated the local. It's a melipona. There are several different species actually that are used for honey in the Maya area. Very well known, very even documented in some of the books, a few books that we have, and well documented at the time of contact, and very important, the wax part in the ecclesiastic aspect of the conquest. So bees were very important. The honeybee, though, as a generalist, has really made it hard for the local bee, the native bee.
Okay. There were a lot of questions, more questions about
Mhm.
how knowledge transfer is happening
Mhm.
from these elder
I'm
gardeners.
so sorry I took too long.
That's all right. Maybe I'll ask one more related to that, but it's very specific. Are there field schools for those interested in Maya forest gardeners to apprentice like these foresters?
Well, there's no obvious one. There are a couple of good schools, one in Honduras, I know, and one in the Yucatan. And we are trying to establish a way to get school children interested. We have a small school garden program at primary schools. My dream would be we find the few people, not everyone's going to be absolutely, all the kids love the garden. They love getting dirty, they love planting things, they love being outside. We say no child left indoors. And I imagine that some of those would be inspired to be an apprentice to some of the few forest gardeners. And we have an idea of a program at a place we call Sopilar, which we recently were involved in collaborating with some Maya people from Omaha, amazingly, to purchase this 45 acres to really recreate the Maya forest garden there. So we're hoping it's definitely Narciso, for example, 12 kids, not one is a forest gardener. So it's a strain.
It is definitely a concern. Annabelle, we're going to leave it there. Thank you again. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it, sharing your knowledge with us and really thought-provoking discussion. So thank you for that. let me say a few more things before we sign off. As a reminder, recordings of today's presentation will be available within several days on the Yale Forest Forum website. This delay allows us time to accurately caption each session, making them more accessible. Slides will also be made available, and when possible, reference documents and readings will be linked on the Yale Forest Forum website. So please check back. Please continue to join us for more in the series on Thursdays from 12 to 1 Eastern US time through the end of April. Next week, we will hear from Larry Barham. Larry is a professor of African archaeology at the University of Liverpool. His talk will focus on the deep prehistory of human use of tropical woodlands in South Central Africa.